This is the Indian Ocean, and it's a desert. Not, of course, because of the lack of water, but because of the fact that dissolved in the surface waters, however warm, there's not much nutrient, not much of the fertiliser that's needed for the good growth of the plant plankton. And so a trip across this vast sea is, it can be boring for a biologist because there's not much in the way of marine life to be seen, until all of a sudden the pattern starts to change. Life starts to appear, first a mere trickle of birds, then masses winging their way to their feeding ground. A school of dolphins, all indicating that you are getting near a special place. An oasis in this desert, a spot where the conditions are just right to support the most complex product of evolution, a coral atoll. These are just some of the small islands in the lagoon of this great atoll. Now, at one time there was no dry land here at all, just open ocean, but thanks to the industry of many thousands of different sorts of plants and animals, but especially of the reef-forming corals, which make their massive skeletons from purest limestone, today I am surrounded by a rim of dry land, 141 kilometres of it in all. New land, the potential of which is there for the taking by anything which can make the journey, get a foothold and adapt itself to the special conditions of such a place. This beautiful bird is a rail, and its ancestors must have flown here at some time in the past, and finding no predators to molest or chase them, they simply forgot how to fly. Today they are so tame that all you have to do to see one is tap on a stone, and out they come to see who's knocking. Isolation from would-be enemies is one advantage of island life, but even in a place like Aldabra, life isn't all a bed of roses. There are many disadvantages. This is one of the giant tortoises of Aldabra, whose ancestors have lived on the island for millions of years before man was ever thought of, and we haven't really got the faintest idea of how they originally got here. Now, when I first came here more than 10 years ago as part of the Royal Society expedition, one of the jobs they gave me was to repaint the numbers on 600 marked tortoises. Now, it wasn't an easy job because you've got to trap them first, and this is a medium-sized one. She's a lady, number 60. Now, since then, the work has gone on apace, and today there are 7,000 of these creatures, each one marked with their own little personal silver disc. Now, the reason for all this marking, all this tagging was twofold. First of all, to try and gain as much information as possible about the lifestyle of these animals, how long they live, how far they move and how fast they grow. But second, and perhaps most important of all, to get an estimate of the total numbers of them that live on the atoll. Now, the method is quite simple once you have got a sample of the population properly marked. There you are, off you go. After each tortoise is marked, they're simply allowed to roam off across the island, mixing with the total population of animals which haven't been tagged or numbered. And after a lot of recounting and a little bit of mathematics, the answer comes out at around a staggering 150,000. Not bad for a mere 141 square kilometres of dry land, especially when you know that much of it is far from hospitable, even for a population of such slow movers. The problem is that coral atolls are made of limestone, which being both soft and soluble, at least as far as rocks go, erodes very quickly, producing a terrain which, though musical to the foot, is not unlike the moon. Not bad going for a wandering ecologist, but impossible for tortoises, however large. And even where the going is better and the terrain may look perfectly okay, it's often riddled and fissured by gigantic holes which I can fall in, let alone a tortoise. Now this one, it must have fallen in, a couple of years back. And of course, unable to climb out the steep sides, it just stayed here and died of starvation. And the really unfortunate thing is that much of the island is riddled with these highly efficient tortoise traps. So the giant tortoises have not got all that much space in which to move about. Well, if it's all you've got, it's all you've got. And the real problem is that there's not much surface water at all, because the atoll is made of limestone, which is pretty porous stuff. So when it does rain, much of the water will drain away very quickly. And the only standing water for a good drink are in these small pools. And, you know, however bad it tastes, that did me a lot of good. The tortoise is perhaps a bit more lucky, because it doesn't just have to rely on the water. It gets much from the water it needs from the nice fresh green leaves it eats. Not all that much space to move about in, not all that much water to drink, and when you come to think of it, not all that much food, well, at least down here at tortoise level. Now, examination of the many droppings shows you that certainly the tortoise does eat the grasses, the herbs and the other low-growing plants down here on the ground. But in here are the unmistakable broad leaves of the bushes and the trees, showing that at least at certain times they must supplement their diet by feeding from the lowest branches. Now, another pretty fantastic thing is that all the plant material is in a very, very good state of preservation. In fact, it's hardly changed at all since it went in through the front end. Now, this shows that these creatures have a very poor digestive system, and so they really must eat an enormous amount just to satisfy their energy requirements. So it's safe to say that under certain conditions and at certain times, availability of food may limit the success of the tortoise. Nevertheless, although many of the environmental chips seem stacked against the poor old tortoise, this is no ageing population doomed to extinction. Everywhere are signs of new life to come. And even if they do make a lot of fuss about it, the end result after incubation is a new brood to swell the population of the atoll. And there's the real problem, because on certain parts of the island, if the population becomes too large, it can begin to destroy its most vital resource. Not food, not water, but shade. In the heat of the day, there's only one thing to do: find some shade and stay in it. And so the tortoises that live down this section of the island have got their lives regulated in relation to the sun. They get up early in the morning and then go out to graze, and they carry on grazing until it just gets too hot, and then they've got to make their way back into these pools of shade which are cast by the stunted trees which have been left growing along the sand dunes here. Now, these are the stay-at-home tortoises. Like me, they got back first, and they're in the shade and safe. But there are others, the whiz kids of the tortoise world. Leaving the close-cropped sward of the main feeding grounds, they headed out for pastures new, and too late they turned back to seek out shade. Any shade, for if they don't find it in time, they pay the ultimate price. Slow death, baked in their own jacket. Now that's a pretty terrible way of dying. In fact, for a tortoise it must be the very worst. But perhaps death of this one and the others like him who tried to push their bounds too far have, over an immense amount of time, spelt success for at least part of the population. You see, because here we're looking at just a small part of an overall pattern of regulation of population. Every year a few more tortoises will be born and some will die in this horrendous way, and so the population is balanced in relation to one of their most limiting resources, the shade which tides them over through the heat of the noonday sun. And this bittersweet story of success of the giant Aldabran tortoise has got much to teach every living creature on the face of this earth, for we all live in an environment in which at some time resources must limit our population. And we must remember that although survival is only for a period of time, extinction is forever. There is one animal which became extinct, which is famed throughout the world, and his immortalised remains are housed in this museum, which is on another small island in the Indian Ocean. As dead as a dodo. This one, unfortunately, is a model, although the bones are real, because when the island was first settled, on the 17th of September 1598, the dodo, which like the rail of Aldabra, having no enemies, had no need to fly, was common across much of the island. 90 years later, it was gone, wiped off the face of evolution. I'm glad the giant tortoises aren't extinct.
Very fertile in terrestrial products. This island feeds vast numbers of birds, which occur in such plenty that 3 of our men sometimes capture 150 in half a day, and might eat.
All the birds here are so tame that they are killed with sticks and caught by his
birds we call falcons, because even a long boiling would scarcely make them tender, but they remain tough. The bird is slow and stupid, easily taken by the hunters.
These birds want wings, in place of which there are 3 or 4 blackish feathers.
Pebbles of various size and color are found in the stomachs of these birds. It appears that these birds swallow all kinds of substances without digesting them.
This island was at one time full of birds and wild ducks, but all of them have become exceedingly rare.
Now, there are many stories about the dodo, but I think my favourite refers to this plant. Those are the leaves of the tamblecock, or the dodo nut tree, and it's been used here as a very, very appropriate marker in a book all about the dodo and his kin. Now, it is said that this tree was quite common, like the dodo, in many of the forested areas of Mauritius, but today there are very, very few of them left. Having ridden to the occasion on my tree bicycle, perhaps I can demonstrate to you the fruit of this fabulous tree. Got one. Now, if I can get inside... Ooh, it tasted filthy, but that's what I wanted. Now, that is a fantastically hard nut. And legend has it that once it had fallen to the ground, it was only the massive beak of the dodo that could crack the nut, allowing the seed inside to germinate. Now, of course, if that were true, the demise of the dodo could well account for the rarity of this tree. And it's interesting that all the trees living in the wild are of considerable age, this one more than 300 years. Now, of course, today many people doubt the legend. There's nothing really to back it up. The only trouble is, of course, without a dodo, we'll never know for sure. But like all local legends, true or false, it's got an important moral to tell us, for it warns that if one member of a natural community becomes extinct, then it must affect the welfare of the other plants and animals that lived alongside it. But why was it that the dodo and many other members of the natural Mauritius setup that had got here under their own steam and have been part of millions of years of Mauritian evolution, why was it that all of a sudden they started to become extinct? The answer is that the island offered opportunity for a new immigrant called man. Great forests of hardwood, which included the much prized ebony, gave the material both for construction and for export. Abundant game birds, which having no knowledge of man at all, fell easy prey, provided a rich and diverse source of food. But most important of all, the environment. Warm sunshine, water on tap throughout the year, the perfect place in which to set up a new way of life. Just one small area of almost natural forest. What a lovely figure, especially when you think that it's almost twice my age. It's an ebony tree, and the hardwood grows very, very slowly. And although this one isn't much larger, it was certainly alive when the dodo walked the forest of Mauritius. And there's one that's died and fallen over. Now, the soft sapwood is already being destroyed by the termite, but there is the hard black heartwood, and that really was the heart of Mauritius' problem, because that is worth a lot of money, and so it was that the ebony forests were the first to go. But man himself didn't have it all his own way. Some of the uninvited immigrants, like smallpox, cholera and malaria, making the most of their opportunity, took their toll, causing disease and death. Every gravestone tells its own story, and many of them record sad tales of death in infancy. Man's population was being controlled where it hurt most, but where it was biologically most effective. And so it was for many years, until a new import came to the aid of man. It's a grass. To the botanists, it's called takarum. To most of us, sugarcane. But to the world at large, that is the most efficient converter of solar power there is. And what is more, it stores it in a form that is readily available to you and I. Now, in structure, the grass is just like the one that grows on your garden lawn, only this one much bigger. A nice stout stalk, and then the leaf starts off as a complete green sheath round the stem. But that's the important bit, because most of the energy is fixed by the chlorophyll green of the leaf blade. And then you can see all those little parallel veins. Now, they transport the products of photosynthesis rapidly away, as if it were keeping the factory floor clean and the whole thing working. And of course, store the sugar down in the stem. Altogether, a very, very efficient system. As long as the conditions are right, and that gets enough water and enough fertiliser, a single cane can produce 25 teaspoonfuls of sugar in one season. And with a little bit of complex mathematics, that makes a total island production of some 700,000 metric tonnes, enough to sweeten the teacups of the world and to put the energy into many walks of life. All this potential allowed Mauritius to become part of the new global economy. Irrigation didn't take the backache out of cane cutting, but it ensured a good harvest each year, and hence more likelihood of long-term employment. A growing world demand for sugar allowed the locals to sell their products and thus buy into the more important advances of the medical revolution. The rate of infant mortality was slashed as cholera, smallpox and malaria were controlled. The chocks were away and the population began to explode, so much so that by 1965 it had doubled and 700,000 people were living off Mauritius. That's 400 to every square kilometre jammed onto this tiny island. So it was, out of the sweetness of sugar, that the strength of the new Mauritians grew. Success for one member of an island community must spell disaster for others, and just how many Mauritian plants and animals have followed the dodo into extinction we shall never know. But what we do know is that today the pitiful scraps of semi-natural Mauritius are the final retreats for no less than 16 unique types of bird and reptile, all of which live on the edge of extinction. The plight of the wildlife of Mauritius is best summarised by reference to one bird that is a relative of the dodo itself. The bird in question is the pink pigeon. And today there are only 30 of them left in the wild. They have one last refuge, a tiny scrap of forest high in the mountains, in which they pair, mate and attempt to bolster the dwindling population. The odds against their survival are incredible. Will this be the last generation of pink pigeons the world will ever see? The poor old pink pigeon is just one of many thousands of animals and plants which today across the world live under the constant threat of extinction, all because of the recent success of man. Now, it's all right for me as a biologist, someone who makes his living out of studying plants and animals and telling other people about them, to stand up here and categorically say the pink pigeon must be saved, money must be spent in setting aside nature reserves and managing national parks so that this small population of birds can thrive and multiply. But what would your answer be if you were local and you were out of work and your children hadn't got enough food to eat? And you were told that but for these funny conservationists, then you could be employed removing the pink pigeon forest and replacing it by a cash crop. What would your answer be as to the fate of this beautiful bird? And you see, the crunch really did come, because the recent increase in the human population began to put an enormous strain on the resources of Mauritius. Unemployment was rife, schools and social services were bursting at the seams, and social unrest was part of the daily round of news. Something had to be done. And it had. The Mauritian people, realising that the root of their troubles was in an exploding population, began to take steps to plan their future population in relation to the resources of their island home. There were enormous problems. Age-old prejudices had to be overcome, ways of life had to be changed, and all the modern forms of birth control had to be adapted for local use. But despite all this, the project is well underway. Now, one of the reasons for this programme was in the interests of providing the locals with a high quality of life, a decision which was backed by government legislation which set aside 2.5% of this island as nature reserves and national parks, where it is hoped the natural heritage of Mauritius will continue to thrive. Now, whatever the reason, it all seems to be beginning to work. But it is early days yet. There's a long, long way to go, and catastrophes, both man-made and natural, may bring the whole project to its knees. And of course, there are always many people who are only too willing to use the private eye of their own opinion to deride any action, whether positive or negative. But the fact remains that this community has taken a brave decision in an attempt to solve the problems of island life. And if you don't think that every one of us is faced with the same problems, then it's as well to remember that we all live on an island, floating in a sea of space.